Today I'm going to be talking about defining success in a people-first era. I'm going to be breaking this down into two different topics. First, I want to be talking about how we measure people on the internet and how that affects your data analytics. And in the second half, I want to give a high-level overview of what's required to truly understand your performance in this highly connected, multi-device world. Now, I was going to do, the classic conference thing, everybody raise your hand if you've got a mobile phone, but I've seen all of you do because we played a game this morning, and I've seen somebody over there has a Google Mini, and I'm guessing you've all probably got a computer or a laptop at home and another one at work. So the point I was going to make is that we all have multiple devices that we use to access the internet. And you're far from alone. These statistics are absolutely eye-watering. They're staggering. As was mentioned this morning, there are over 8 billion connected devices in the world today, and this number is going to double over the next couple of years alone. And Ofcom released this study, A Decade of Digital Dependency, back in August, and their headline was that most people in the UK are dependent on their digital devices and they need constant connection to the internet. But this perhaps isn't that surprising to a very technical audience. So why am I talking about it, and what does this have to do with data analytics? And it's because of these little buggers here, cookies. I'm going to give a very quick history lesson. So back in the 90s, web analytics was largely log file based. So your website server would collect logs of all of the IP addresses that have been used to access your website. And then when you analyze those logs, you can count the number of unique IP addresses, and we call that metric users. And this worked really well for a while, but as the internet grew and the proliferation of broadband at home and multiple people sharing the same home internet connection, this metric became less and less valuable because it was a less true reflection of the users who were accessing your website. So along came cookies instead. So cookies were an attempt to solve this problem, a new method of web analytics. And they're very, very simple. They work by storing an ID in the cookie that is stored on the device that you're using to access a website. And then instead of counting the number of unique IP addresses that have accessed your website, you count the number of unique cookie IDs, and you get a much, much better metric for users. But there's a catch, and that is that cookies have some limitations. They're not shared across browsers, they're not shared across devices, and they're easy to delete. So much so that it's widely encouraged as sort of good computer maintenance to regularly delete your cookies, and there's tons of apps out there on the market that will help you do that. If we put this into context of an always connected multi-device world, the problems become really apparent. You've got one user here using a couple of different devices, a couple of different browsers. It's very, very easy for them to have multiple cookies, which by web analytics software will be seen as multiple different users. And if you just think about how this inability to truly identify an individual affects even the most basic of marketing tasks like customer segmentation or user journey analysis, and the problem becomes really clear. Cookies are not a good proxy for people, and the problem will only continue to get worse as the world becomes increasingly connected. As you increase the number of devices you're using to access the internet, cookies become less and less valuable to us as a metric or a method of web analytics. So what are the options? I didn't come here just to give problems. I'd like to give a few solutions as well. If you're fortunate enough to run a website with a sizable logged-in experience, or if you've got a large mailing list, then it's highly likely that you have your own collection of IDs in a database somewhere that you use to identify each of your customers. You can share this ID with your web analytics tool, and you can join together cookies across multiple devices and multiple browsers to deduplicate these users and vastly increase the accuracy of your data. And if you're not convinced by how much this matters, we did this exact method with a client of ours. We used user IDs to deduplicate users, and we discovered that 40% of logged-in users had 2 or more cookies, and that is enormous. So once you can deduplicate these users, you are drastically increasing the quality of your data. However, I'm aware that there'll be some of you in the room that perhaps don't have access to a significant logged-in experience, or you don't have a large email database. There are options for you as well. There's these third-party cross-device networks. And these players, typically, they own a very large database of cookies, and these cookies are assigned to users across devices. And by leveraging these on your website, they will provide you with an ID that you can use to better identify users and begin deduplicating these cookies across devices. And on the same theme, I'm really excited to talk about Google Signals. I don't know how many of you have seen this or using this already. But Google Signals provides anonymous cross-device reports in Google Analytics with no major technical setup required. And this is particularly exciting because Google own what is probably the largest and most comprehensive cross-device graph in the world due to the widespread use of Google accounts. Google Signals is free, it's in beta, you can access it via Google Analytics, and if you haven't already, I definitely recommend you check this out. And in Google Signals, this is the kind of report you might expect to see. You can see on the left, you can see different devices that people have used, you can see single users visiting the website via different devices. But what really excites me about this is over on the right-hand side, you've got this revenue per user and transactions per user metrics. And they might not seem that groundbreaking, but to my knowledge, I think this is the first time that Google have surfaced these user-based metrics in standard reports in Google Analytics. Previously, I think they've only been available via custom reports or the API. But this is really exciting because it's these user-level metrics that we need in a people-first strategy, because we don't really care about converting visits. We care about converting people. So to reiterate, cookies are not people, and in a people-first strategy, we need to be thinking about multi-device, and we need to be prepared to overcome the challenges that come with that. Using some of the methods that I've shared will vastly improve the accuracy of your data, but that's only half the battle. The second half of the battle is measuring value. I'm not really a football kind of guy, but I am quite good at smiling and nodding when my boss wants to tell me about who kicked what where over the weekend. And one of the stories he told me about was this match between Man United and Man City. There's no audio, but if you want to play the video. So what was interesting about this is that there were 44 passes before Man City scored a goal, which apparently is quite a lot. But keep an eye, who do you think here should be getting the credit for scoring the goal? Is it the player who won the ball from the other team? Or is it the guy who kicked it in the net? Or is it that they all should get an even bit of credit? I am, of course, talking about attribution. Attribution problems are really common. We see them everywhere. They're in things like risk assessment or forensics and scientific research. Attribution is essentially just about identifying the contributing factors to a particular event or an outcome. So just to kind of recap on the models that are available to us in most web analytics software, Google Analytics included, of course. You've got the classic last-click attribution model in which the last touch gets 100% of the credit. Your first touch, which is the inverse, the first channel or touch point gets 100% of the credit for a conversion. Or you could look at a linear model in which each touch point gets equal credit for the conversion. But to loosely quote the statistician George E.P. Box, all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. And the models that I've just described are really valued for their simplicity, and they can be surprisingly insightful, especially when used comparatively. So don't be too quick to dismiss them. But all of these models do impose some kind of arbitrary rule about customer behavior, which can sound quite bizarre when you really think about them and break them down. So if you take the last-click attribution model, for example, this model assumes that by the time the user has converted, they have entirely forgotten about every other interaction they've ever had with your website, and they therefore deserve 0% of the credit. And when you think about it like that, it becomes really apparent that these perhaps aren't the way to go in all situations. These static models can be a problem because the reality is that customer behavior is unpredictable, and it can't be explained simply with simple rules. I like to think of them as a little bit like a choose-your-own-adventure book. The customer is free to choose their path choose any path they like towards the conversion, and as a business, all you can really control is the series of touch points that they can take along the way. But to better understand these journeys, we need more sophisticated approaches to the way in which we model them. Of course, I'm talking about data-driven solutions. So data-driven attribution modeling is something I'm sure you've heard lots about. Many of you may well have had exposure to it through things like Google Ads, DoubleClick, or Google or Analytics 360. And these tools really shine because of their really deep integrations with the entirety of the Google stack. You're able to understand your attribution data and optimize your campaigns within the same interface. However, there will be people in the room today with a need for a more nuanced approach to attribution. For example, if your business has a consideration period of more than 90 days, these attribution models may not be suitable for you. Or perhaps your sales happen offline months after the user's last web interaction. Or perhaps your conversions are affected by entirely unrelated matters, such as the stock market or the weather, and you need to integrate these into your attribution model. At RocketMill, these are exactly the kind of attribution problems that we've devoted quite a significant amount of time into solving. And by leveraging the Google Analytics API and significant portions of the Google Cloud Platform, we're now able to deliver customizable and transparent data-driven models and present them in a meaningful interface via Data Studio. We've been so pleased with these results that I'm really excited to announce that we are now looking for a small number of participants to test our in-house data warehousing and attribution technology. And if this sounds of interest to you, I would very much like to speak to you after the break. I hope you found this talk useful. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon.